"If you get this 1967 Cadillac running after 20 years, I'll marry you," she said, and the single dad turned pale. Okay, so I don't even know where to start, honestly. I've been lurking on this forum for a while now, reading other guys' stories, and I always thought, man, nothing like that would ever happen to me. I'm just Daniel, just a regular dude with grease under his fingernails and a 7-year-old who still sleeps with a stuffed elephant named Peanut. But here I am, typing this out at 11:47 p.m., sitting at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee next to me, because if I don't get this out of my chest tonight, I swear it's going to eat me alive. Let me back up a little. My name's Daniel. I'm 36. I run a small one-man mechanic shop out of a rented garage space on the east side of town, the kind of place where the fluorescent light flickers every time a truck rolls by outside, and the radio only picks up 2 stations clearly. I've been doing this for 11 years. Before that, I was working at a dealership, but I left because the manager there thought yelling at people was the same as managing them. I took my tools, my dignity, and my then 3-year-old daughter, and I never looked back. Her name's Lily. She's got her mother's eyes, and big and brown, and the kind that make you feel like you did something wrong even when you didn't. And she's got my stubbornness, which I'm told is not a compliment. Her mom left when Lily was 2, packed a bag on a Tuesday morning like she was going to the grocery store and just didn't come back. No big fight, no dramatic scene, just gone. I spent about 6 months being angry about it. Then I just got tired of being angry. Because Lily needed me present, not bitter. So I chose present. That's the context. That's the life I was living when Sarah Calloway walked into it. She came into the shop on a Wednesday morning in early October. I remember it was cold. That sharp, specific cold that comes right before real winter. The kind that makes the metal in the garage smell different. I was under a Ford pickup replacing a brake line when I heard heels on the concrete. Now I want to be clear. Nobody in heels ever comes to my shop. My clients are mostly contractors, delivery guys, and a few older men who've been bringing me their cars since I was the new kid in town. Heels on my floor was unusual. I slid out from under the truck, and the first thing I noticed was that she wasn't dressed like someone who'd accidentally turned into the wrong driveway. She meant to be there. She was wearing this dark green coat, the kind of coat you see in magazine ads, perfectly cut with those big buttons. And her hair was dark and pulled back but with a few strands loose around her face, like she'd been somewhere and had a long morning. She was holding a manila envelope in both hands, pressed against her chest like it was something fragile. She looked around the shop the way people do when they're trying not to look uncomfortable, but they absolutely are. Her eyes landed on me and she said, "Are you Daniel Mercer?" "Depends," I said, wiping my hands on a shop rag. "You from the county?" She almost smiled at that. "No. My name is Sarah Calloway. I think you knew my father, or at least you serviced one of his cars a few years back. A 72 Chevelle." I thought for a second. "Calloway. Robert Calloway. Yeah, I remembered him, quiet man. Came in twice, paid cash, tipped well, didn't talk much, but had the kind of eyes that made you think he was always doing math in his head. He'd passed away. I'd seen the obituary in the local paper the previous spring. Heart attack, I think." "Yeah," I said. "I remember your dad. I'm sorry about your loss." She nodded, and something in her expression shifted just slightly. The kind of shift that happens when grief is right below the surface, but you've trained yourself to keep it from rising. "Thank you. That's actually why I'm here." She opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph. She handed it to me, and I looked at it. It was a car, a 1967 Cadillac DeVille, the kind of car that in its day looked like the future and now looks like a dream somebody had. Long, wide, with those fins in the back that were already a little out of style by 67, but Cadillac kept them anyway because they were Cadillac and they did what they wanted. In the photo, the car was inside a garage, a real garage, not like mine, but one of those big private ones with clean floors. It looked like it was in rough shape even then, but you could tell what it used to be. "My father bought this car in 1989, she said. "He drove it for about 4 years, then something happened with the engine. I was little. I don't know the details, and then he parked it, said he'd fix it someday." She paused. "He never did. It's been sitting in our family property for 20 years. I want you to bring it back. I looked up from the photo. Bring it back. Fix it. Make it run again. She said it simply, like she was asking me to pick up dry cleaning. Whatever it needs, I'll pay for everything. Parts, labor, your time, all of it. I turned the photo over in my hands. 20 years sitting. That wasn't just a repair job. That was an excavation. Miss Calloway, a car that's been sitting for 2 decades. That's not just a tune-up. That's rust. That's seals. That's probably a fuel system that needs to be rebuilt from scratch, brake lines, coolant, electrical. I know, she said. I'm not expecting a miracle by next week. I just need someone who actually cares about what they're doing. She looked at me directly when she said that. Not aggressively. Just directly. Like she'd already done her research and made her decision and was just waiting for me to catch up. My father's mechanic retired. I asked around. 3 different people told me to come find you. I didn't know what to say to that. 3 people? In this town, where I was just the quiet guy with the flickering light and the 2-station radio. There's one more thing, she said, and she reached into the envelope again. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it out to me. I took it. It was a handwritten note, or what looked like one, except it was formal. A proposal, almost. She'd written down terms. Compensation, timeline, materials budget, and at the bottom there was a line I read twice. If the car runs again, I'd like to get to know you better. With sincerity, Sarah. I looked up. She was watching me with that same steady look, and her cheeks had gone just the faintest bit pink, which told me she was braver than she looked. Now, I want to be honest with you guys because that's the whole point of this forum, right? My first reaction wasn't excitement. It wasn't flattery. It was fear, because I hadn't let anyone look at me like that, like I was worth something, in a very long time. I'd gotten so used to being invisible that the idea of being seen felt almost dangerous. I'll take a look at the car, I said. That was it. That was how it started. She had the Cadillac towed to my shop the following Saturday morning. I remember Lily was with me that day. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, usually watches her on weekdays, but weekends are ours, always. And Lily was sitting on the old wooden stool I keep near the tool bench, drawing horses in a notebook when the flatbed pulled up. When they unloaded the car, I actually felt my chest tighten. It was worse than the photo. Of course it was. The photo was from maybe 10 years ago. What rolled off that flatbed was something between a car and a monument. The body was solid, and that was the miracle of it. The old American steel had held its shape, which told me the garage it had been stored in was at least somewhat protected from the elements. But the chrome was pitted in places. The hood had surface rust along the seams. All 4 tires were flat and cracked, and when I opened the driver's door, which required actual force, the rubber seal had basically fused to the frame. The smell that came out was indescribable. Not just old. Stored. Like time itself had a smell. Lily looked up from her notebook. Daddy, is that a car or a dinosaur? I laughed. Actually laughed for real, which I don't do enough. It's both, baby. I spent the rest of that Saturday just assessing. Didn't touch anything mechanically, just looked. Took notes in the little spiral notebook I keep in my back pocket. Made a list that eventually covered 3 pages. The engine was seized. I expected that. The fuel system was completely compromised. The brake system would need to be fully rebuilt. Electrical was a mystery box I wasn't even going to open until I got the mechanical stuff sorted. But the bones were there. Under all that age and rust and silence, there was still a car. A real one. The kind they don't build anymore. I took a photo of the car and texted it to Sarah, along with a rough list of what I found. She replied in about 4 minutes. Just one line. Thank you for not giving up on it already. I stared at that message longer than I should have. Over the next 3 weeks, I fell into a rhythm. Weekdays, I'd do my regular work, the oil changes, the brake jobs, the bread and butter. And then after Mrs. Patterson picked Lily up for the evening, I'd stay late and work on the Cadillac. Sometimes until midnight. There was something about that car that I can't fully explain. It wasn't just a job, it was like That car and I were both stuck in the same way. Both of us had been something once, and then life happened, and there we were. Functional enough to survive, but not really running. Sarah started stopping by. Not every day, maybe twice a week in the late afternoon. She'd bring 2 coffees, always the same order for herself, always asking what I wanted first, which sounds small, but when you've been a single dad for 5 years, having someone ask what you want feels like a big deal. We'd talk while I worked. She'd ask about the car, about what I'd found, about what each part did. She was genuinely curious, not just making conversation. She asked good questions, the kind that made me explain things more clearly than I ever had before. And she'd ask about Lily. That's the thing that got me. Honestly. Not the coat, not the way she looked, not any of that. It was the way she'd ask, "How's Lily today?" Casually, like it was already a normal thing to ask, like Lily was already part of the conversation. The first time Lily met Sarah, my daughter studied her for about 45 seconds with the seriousness of a Supreme Court judge. Then said, "Your coat has the same color as our couch." Sarah looked down at her coat, then back at Lily, and said, completely deadpan, "Then we were clearly meant to meet." Lily decided she was okay after that. I'd started to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Not just attracted, though yeah. Obviously, but hopeful. That specific kind of hopeful that's scary because it means you have something to lose again. I should have known that was the moment to be careful. His name was Trevor Calloway, Sarah's younger brother. And I didn't know he existed until about week 4 when he showed up at my shop on a Thursday afternoon unannounced. I heard the car before I saw him. A matte black Porsche Cayenne, the kind with the custom rims that cost more than my truck. He parked it right in front of the garage door, which is my #1 pet peeve, and he got out like he owned the block. He was maybe 30, 31, lean in that gym expensive way, wearing a blazer over a t-shirt with the collar up. He had Sarah's dark hair but none of her warmth in his face. His eyes were the kind of light gray that looks almost colorless, and they moved around the shop like he was appraising livestock. "You Daniel?" he said. "Yeah." I kept working. I was bleeding a brake caliper on a Silverado. Trevor Calloway, Sarah's brother. He didn't offer his hand, just put both of them in his jacket pockets and looked at the Cadillac, which was up on stands with half its interior dismantled. "That thing really worth fixing?" "To the right person," I said. He made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "My sister has a soft spot for lost causes." He looked at me when he said it. Not at the car. At me. Now I've dealt with guys like Trevor my whole life. I grew up in a neighborhood where money was something other people had. And I learned pretty early how to read the way certain men look at you when they've already decided you're beneath them. It's a specific thing. Not aggressive, not obvious, just dismissive. Like you're a piece of furniture they're deciding whether or not to move. I put down my tool and looked at him. "Was there something you needed, Mr. Calloway?" "Just wanted to meet the man my sister keeps talking about." He smiled. It was a perfectly acceptable smile that somehow didn't reach his eyes by about 6 inches. "She speaks highly of you." "She's been kind," I said. "She is." He nodded slowly, like he was filing something away. "She's always been kind. Sometimes too kind, you know. Our dad used to say she trusted people the way other people trust maps. Completely. Right up until she drove off a cliff." He chuckled like that was a charming anecdote. "Anyway, just wanted to put a face to the name. Keep up the good work." He got back in the Porsche, and he was gone. I stood there in the quiet of the shop for a long moment after he left. The Silverado was still up on the lift. The radio was on the country station. The Cadillac sat there in pieces, patient as a saint. And something in my gut, that same gut that's kept me alive through 11 years of doing everything alone, was telling me something I didn't want to hear. I didn't say anything to Sarah about her brother's visit. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because I didn't want to make something out of nothing. Maybe because the last thing I wanted was to create conflict between her and her family over a guy she'd known for a month. Maybe because I'd spent 5 years making sure I didn't cause problems for anyone, and that instinct is hard to shake. I just kept working on the car. By week 6, I'd gotten the engine free. That was a day, let me tell you. 3 hours with penetrating oil, careful heat, the right tools, and a lot of patience that I don't technically have but pretend to. When the engine turned over for the first time, not running, not yet, just turning, just moving the way it was supposed to move. I actually sat down on the floor of the shop and put my head back against the workbench. Lily was with me that evening, and she climbed down from her stool and sat next to me on the concrete floor. She leaned her head against my arm and didn't say anything. She's good at that, knowing when words aren't the right thing. "You okay, Daddy?" she finally asked. "Yeah, baby." I put my arm around her. "Just really tired. The dinosaur car is waking up," she said confidently. I laughed again. Second genuine laugh in 6 weeks, and both of them were because of her. "Yeah," I said, "it's waking up." I texted Sarah that night, just engine turns, we're getting there. She replied with a voice message. "I still have it," she said. "Oh my God, Daniel, my dad he would have," and then her voice broke, just slightly, and she stopped and took a breath and said, "Thank you. Just, thank you." And then she said goodnight. I listened to that message 3 times. I was falling for this woman. I knew it, and I couldn't stop it, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. But somewhere across town, in a matte black Porsche and a blazer with the collar up, someone was already deciding that this was a problem that needed to be handled. I just didn't know it yet. So I need to back up just a little before I get into what happened next, because I want you guys to understand something about the kind of man I was at that point in my life. I wasn't naive. I want to make that clear. 11 years of doing everything alone, paying bills alone, making decisions alone, sitting in the dark after Lily fell asleep and just existing alone. That kind of life doesn't make you naive. It makes you careful. Almost too careful. The kind of careful where you measure every good thing that comes your way against the cost of losing it, before you even let yourself enjoy it. So when things with Sarah started feeling real, like actually genuinely real, not just 2 people being polite to each other over coffee in a garage, I didn't let myself run toward it. I walked, slowly, with one eye on the exit, the way I always do. That's the version of me that existed in the beginning of week 7. And week 7 is when everything started to unravel. It was a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because Lily has art class at school on Tuesdays, and she always comes home with paint somewhere on her face that she swears she doesn't know how it got there. I'd picked her up, fed her, gotten her through her reading homework. She was working on a book about a girl who befriends a wild horse, which she took extremely seriously, and by 7:30 she was asleep. I went back to the shop the way I'd been doing most nights. The Cadillac was at a critical stage. I'd finished the brake system rebuild, the fuel lines were new, and I was working through the electrical, which on a 57-year-old car is basically like doing surgery on a patient whose medical records are written in a language you mostly speak. It requires patience and a very high tolerance for small electric shocks. I was tracing a wiring harness near the firewall, headlamp strapped to my forehead, radio on low, when my phone buzzed on the workbench. It was a number I didn't recognize. Local area code. I almost didn't answer. I'm bad with unknown numbers. My policy is usually to let them go to voicemail and deal with it later. But something made me pick up, I don't know what. Call it instinct, call it the universe being dramatic, I don't know. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then a woman's voice. Low, careful, like someone who'd rehearsed what they were going to say and was now second-guessing it. "Is this Daniel Mercer?" "Who's calling?" Another pause. "My name is Amber, you don't know me." She stopped. I heard her take a breath. "I was paid to do something and I'm not going to do it, but I thought you should know." I straightened up slowly. The headlamp was still on, throwing a bright circle on the underside of the Cadillac's dashboard. "Pay to do what?" "To get close to you," she said. "To take photos. Make it look like something it wasn't." The shop got very quiet. The radio was playing something I couldn't hear anymore. "Who paid you?" I asked. My voice came out steady. "I don't know how." She hesitated. "A long one. Long enough that I thought she might hang up." "Trevor Calloway," she said. I sat down on my work stool and I sat there. I didn't say anything for a moment. The headlamp clicked off on its timer, and I was sitting in the half-dark of the shop with just the work lights on the far side. And I held the phone against my ear and I tried to organize my thoughts into something coherent. "Tell me everything," I said. And she did. Her name was Amber Reyes. She was 28, she'd grown up 2 towns over, and she'd done occasional work for Trevor before. Mostly things she described as social management, which I took to mean showing up at events, being seen with people, that kind of thing. Gray area stuff, she said. Nothing she'd felt great about, but nothing that crossed a line she couldn't live with. Until this. Trevor had contacted her 3 weeks earlier, right around the time he'd come to visit my shop, I realized, and laid it out simply. She was to come to my garage, present herself as a woman with car trouble, strike up a conversation, and over the course of a few visits make things look friendly, flirtatious, close. His plan was to have a photographer, someone he'd already hired, a guy who did that kind of work, the grimy kind, positioned to catch us in whatever situation looked most compromising. Not anything real. Just the appearance of something real. A photo of a woman touching your arm, the right angle, the right framing. That's enough to tell a story that isn't true. The photos were going to Sarah. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. I wasn't aggressive about it, I genuinely wanted to know. Amber was quiet for a second. "Because I went and looked you up," she said. "I always do before. Just to know who I'm dealing with. And I saw, you've got a daughter. You're doing this alone." She paused again. "My dad raised me alone, after my mom left. He was a mechanic too, actually." Her voice got smaller. "I just couldn't do it. I'm sorry, I'm really sorry." I didn't know what to say to that, I still don't fully. We talked for another 20 minutes. I asked questions. She answered them. By the end of the call, I had a rough picture of the whole thing. The timeline, the photographer's first name, the fact that Trevor had specifically told her that his goal was to make sure Sarah came to her senses about the mechanic before she embarrassed the family. That's how he'd phrased it. Embarrassed the family. After we hung up, I sat in that shop for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in those minutes, because that's what this forum is for, right? You guys don't want the sanitized version. So here it is. The first thing I felt was not anger. It was something closer to recognition. Like, of course this is what was happening, because this is how it always goes for guys like me. Something good starts happening, and then something moves in the dark to make sure it doesn't last. I'd felt it before. The invisible hand, the silent no, the quiet reminder that you don't belong in certain rooms. Then the anger came, but it was slow and cold, not hot and fast. The hot anger burns itself out. The cold kind just stays. I picked up my phone and I looked at my texts with Sarah. The last one from her was from that afternoon. She'd sent me a picture of a magazine ad from 1967 that had been for the exact model of car I was working on. And she'd written, "Look, this is what she's supposed to look like," with a little heart. A little heart that she'd probably put there without thinking too hard about it, just because she was excited. I put the phone face down on the workbench. I didn't call her that night. I needed to think, not react, think. Not because I'd spent enough of my life reacting to things and I was tired of it. I wanted to be deliberate this time. I wanted to be smart. So I went home, checked on Lily, sound asleep, one arm around Peanut the stuffed elephant, and I sat at my kitchen table with that cold cup of coffee and I thought until about 2 in the morning. I want to tell you about Sarah for a minute, because I feel like I haven't done her justice yet in this story and she deserves it. Sarah Calloway was not what you'd imagine when I say millionaire. I know that sounds like something a guy would say to justify falling for someone out of his league. She's not like the others, but I genuinely mean it in a specific, observable way. She didn't carry herself like someone who expected to be catered to. She said please and thank you to waitresses and meant it. She held doors. When she came to the shop, she never once looked around like the place was beneath her. She'd pull up a spare stool and drink her coffee and ask me things like she was actually listening to the answers, not just waiting for her turn to talk. She'd told me a few things about her life by then. about growing up as Robert Calloway's daughter, which came with money and expectations and a kind of loneliness that wealth doesn't fix. About how she'd built her own business in her late 20s, a small but serious commercial real estate consulting firm, and how her father had been so proud that he'd cried at her first office opening and tried to hide it by pretending he had something in his eye. About how, since he died, she'd been going through the motions of her own life, feeling like a road with its signage removed. She knew she was still moving. She just wasn't sure where she was going. She'd told me that the Cadillac wasn't really about the car. It was about finishing something her father had started, about honoring the version of him that believed things could be fixed, even when he didn't get around to fixing them. I understood that in a way I couldn't explain in words. I just understood it. And Trevor, this man who shared her blood, who'd grown up in the same house, who knew all of that about her, had decided to weaponize it, had decided that her grief, her hope, the small, careful thing she was allowing herself to feel was an inconvenience to be managed. The cold anger got colder. I didn't make any moves for 3 days. I went to work, I picked up Lily, I worked on the Cadillac at night. I texted Sarah normally. I wasn't going to let anything change on the surface until I knew what I was doing. I think that was the hardest part, knowing what I knew and not being able to say it yet. Looking at her texts and not being able to respond the way I actually felt because I needed to be careful. On Thursday morning, I called Amber back. I'd thought about it for 2 days and decided that her call had been an act of courage that deserved to be taken seriously. I wanted to meet in person. She agreed and we met at a diner 2 towns over, her suggestion neutral ground which I respected. She was younger than her voice suggested, tired around the eyes in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She was wearing a plain gray hoodie and nursing a cup of tea, and she looked like someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a while and wasn't sure how to put it down. We sat across from each other in a corner booth and she walked me through everything again, in person this time, with details she'd left out on the phone. The photographer's name, a guy named Craig who operated out of the back of a print shop 2 towns over and whose less legal work was known in certain circles. The fact that Trevor had paid Amber in 2 installments, the first already received, the second contingent on delivery of usable photos. The approximate timeline, Trevor wanted everything done within the next 2 weeks. He's going to do it with someone else if I don't, she said. He's like that. He doesn't stop, he just pivots. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I don't know if telling you does anything really, but I couldn't not tell you. It does something, I said. I ordered us both breakfast. She tried to refuse, I insisted, partly out of habit and partly because it felt like the right thing to do. And while we waited, I asked her if she'd be willing to put what she knew in writing. Not for a lawyer, not for anything formal, just a written account. For me, in case I needed it. She looked at me for a long moment. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I want to be ready. She wrote it out longhand on the back of 3 paper placemats and she signed it. I folded them carefully and put them in my jacket pocket. When the food came, we ate mostly in silence, the comfortable kind that exists between 2 people who've just done something significant together and don't need to perform about it. Before we left, she said, "For what it's worth, she talks about you differently than I expected." I looked up. What do you mean? Trevor told me you were just some guy she'd hired and gotten confused about. That's how he described it. I did some looking around before the meeting today. I follow her social media. I needed context. She looked at me carefully. She posted a photo of that old Cadillac 2 days ago. No caption, just the car. But you could tell from the angle she was standing right next to someone. She paused. People don't take photos like that of things they're confused about. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. But walking back to my truck after, I felt something shift in my chest. The small, stubborn, fragile thing that I'd been protecting behind all that careful walking finally moved an inch forward. That Friday, Sarah came by the shop in the late afternoon like usual. She brought the coffees. She sat on the stool. She asked about the electrical, and I showed her what I'd been working on, the instrument cluster, specifically which I'd managed to get partially functional, and when I turned the key to the accessories position and the gauges moved, actually responded, actually woke up after 20 years of silence, She made a sound I can't fully describe. It was somewhere between a laugh and something that wasn't a laugh. She put her hand over her mouth for a second. He used to check those gauges every single time he got in, she said. Every single time. Even just to go to the grocery store. He'd start it up, let it warm, and check every gauge like he was a pilot. She shook her head slowly. I used to tease him about it. I'd say, "Dad, you're going to Kroger, not the moon." I didn't say anything. I just let her have the moment. After a while, she looked at me and said, "Why do you do this? Fix cars?" "No." She tilted her head slightly. "Care. You care about things. The car, Lily, the way you... I don't know. You talk about things like they matter." I thought about it. "I guess because the alternative is going through everything like it doesn't," I said. "And that seems like a waste." She looked at me for a moment with an expression I didn't have a name for. Then she looked back at the gauges, still registering, still alive after 2 decades of quiet. Sitting in my jacket pocket. 3 folded paper placemats. Across town, a man in a matte black Porsche who'd already set something into motion. And me, right there in the middle, with grease on my hands and a decision I needed to make soon. I just didn't know that I had less time than I thought. Because the following Monday morning, I pulled up to my shop and found the lock broken. I stood in front of that broken lock for a long moment before I even went inside. The metal was bent outward, not kicked in, not forced with a crowbar in a hurry. Somebody had taken their time. That detail bothered me more than the break-in itself. A rushed break-in is desperation. A careful one is intention. I pushed the door open slowly. The shop looked mostly undisturbed, tools still on the pegboard. The Silverado that belonged to a regular client still up on the secondary lift. The radio sitting where I'd left it. But the Cadillac, I walked straight to it and started checking. Running my hands along the body, opening the hood, looking underneath. And about 4 minutes in, I found it. The fuel line I'd replaced 2 weeks prior had been partially disconnected. Not fully. Just enough that if I'd tried to start the car without checking first, it would have leaked, and depending on the circumstances, that leak could have become something worse. It wasn't a mechanical failure. The fitting was too clean. Someone had used a tool. I stepped back from the car and stood very still. This wasn't a robbery. Nothing was taken. This was a message. Or worse, a setup. Because a fuel leak on a car you're responsible for fixing, in your own shop, with your name on the work, that's liability. That's the kind of thing that ends a small operation like mine. One incident, one fire, one insurance investigation asking why the fuel system failed, and I'm done. No shop, no income, no way to keep the lights on for me and Lily. My hands were steady, but my stomach wasn't. I took photos of everything. The lock, the fuel line connection, the ground underneath where a small amount of fuel had already dripped and dried. I documented all of it methodically, the way I'd learned to do things when I stopped trusting that situations would resolve themselves fairly. Then I reconnected the fitting properly, checked everything else twice, and opened for the day like nothing happened. I called Amber that afternoon from my truck during lunch. I told her what I'd found. She went quiet in a way that told me she wasn't surprised. "Craig," she said. "The photographer. He does other work too. Odd jobs. Trevor uses him for things." "What kind of things?" "The kind you don't ask questions about." She paused. "Daniel, I think he's accelerating. I think something made him nervous and he's pushing harder." I thought about what could have made Trevor nervous. And then I thought about that photo Sarah had posted. The Cadillac, no caption, taken from a close angle. The one that showed she wasn't confused at all. Maybe Trevor had seen it too. Maybe he'd read the same thing in it that Amber had read. "Okay," I said. "I need one more thing from you, if you're willing." She didn't hesitate. "What?" "I need you to contact Craig. Tell him you're still in. Tell him you're ready to proceed." Silence on the line. Then, "You want me to string him along?" "I want to know when and where," I said. "That's all. I just want to see it coming." Another pause. Longer. I didn't rush her. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll reach out today." 2 days later, Amber texted me a time and a location. Craig had responded fast. Trevor apparently wanted things moving. The plan was for Amber to come to my shop the following Thursday evening, stay for about an hour, and Craig would be positioned across the street in a gray Honda with a long lens. I read that text 4 times. Then I made 2 decisions. The first was practical. I called a buddy of mine named Walt. I've known him since high school. He works in property maintenance now, big guy, quiet, the kind of person you want in your corner specifically because he never makes things bigger than they need to be. I told him I needed a favor Thursday evening. I needed him parked across the street from my shop in his work truck, watching a gray Honda. Not confronting anyone, just watching and recording. Walt said, "You okay?" I said yes. He said, "I'll be there at 6. The second decision was harder. I called Sarah. She picked up on the second ring. I could hear road noise. She was driving somewhere. "Hey, everything okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Can you talk?" "Give me 2 seconds." I heard a turn signal, then the sound of a car slowing. "Okay," I pulled over. "What's up?" And I told her. Not everything. Not yet. Not on the phone. But enough. I told her someone had broken into my shop, that I had reason to believe it was connected to someone trying to interfere with things between us. That I wasn't calling to alarm her or to make accusations, but because she deserved to know that something was happening and that I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was measured in a way that told me she was doing the same thing I'd been doing all week, keeping herself steady by choice, not by instinct. "How long have you known something was wrong?" "About a week." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" That was a fair question. I'd thought about how to answer it. "Because I didn't have anything solid yet," I said. "And because I didn't want to come to you with half a story and have you fill in the wrong half." She thought about that. "Okay," she said, "okay. What do you need from me right now?" That stopped me. Because in my experience, when you tell someone something hard, they usually make it about what they need. The reassurance, the explanation, the comfort. She'd gone straight to what I needed. I didn't know what to do with that. "Nothing right now," I said. "I just needed you to know, and I needed to hear your voice." That last part came out before I fully decided to say it. There was a beat of silence. "I'm glad you called," she said. And the way she said it, simple, direct, no performance, made something in me go very quiet and very certain at the same time. We stayed on the phone for another few minutes without saying much. Then she had to go. I sat in my truck in the shop parking lot and watched the afternoon light change on the asphalt, and I thought about how strange it was that the worst week I'd had in years somehow also contained the best phone call. Thursday came the way bad days always do, looking like any other day. I worked my regular morning, an alignment job, an oil change for a woman who brought her golden retriever in the car every time and apologized for the dog hair every time, and I always said I didn't mind because I genuinely didn't. Normal things. Ordinary things. At 5:30 I texted Walt. He replied with a single thumbs up. At 6 o'clock Amber arrived. She'd dressed the way Trevor had apparently instructed. Casual, nothing dramatic, just a woman stopping by. She came in, and I showed her around the shop the way I would with anyone who was curious. And we talked about the Cadillac. She asked questions. I answered them. It was almost peaceful in a strange way. 2 people performing a scene for an audience neither of us could see, both of us completely aware of the performance, moving through it calmly. At 6:48, Walt texted me. Gray Honda. Parked. Guy with camera. I've been recording for 20 minutes. I looked at that text. Then I looked at Amber. She'd seen something in my expression. "He's there?" She asked quietly. "He's there." She nodded slowly. She looked at the Cadillac for a moment. Really looked at it, the way people look at things when they're thinking about something else entirely. "You know," she said, "my dad's car was a '79 Buick, nothing special, but he kept it running for 18 years. She paused. "Guys who take care of old things, they're a specific kind of person." I didn't have a response to that, but I understood what she meant. At 7:15 she left. Naturally, unhurried. And across the street, a man with a long lens got what he thought he needed. What he didn't know was that Walt had gotten it first. Friday morning, I woke up before my alarm. That happens sometimes when my brain decides sleep is no longer a priority and starts running through things without my permission. I lay there in the dark for a few minutes listening to the house, the particular silence of a place where a child is sleeping, which is different from any other kind of silence. And I thought about what I had in my possession. 3 handwritten placemats signed by Amber. Walt's video footage from Thursday night, already transferred to my phone and backed up in 2 places, because I'm not a man who trusts single copies of important things. And something else I hadn't mentioned yet, something I'd found on my own, quietly during the previous week, the kind of find that comes from paying attention when other people assume you're not. Let me explain. 3 weeks prior, Sarah had mentioned offhand that her family's company, Callaway Holdings, a mid-sized property and asset management firm that Trevor effectively ran day to day, had been going through some kind of internal restructuring. She hadn't gone into detail and I hadn't pushed. But the comment had stayed with me, the way certain things do when your gut files them under remember this without telling you why. So one evening, after Lily was asleep and the shop was closed, I'd spent a couple hours on my laptop doing something I almost never do: research. I'm not an educated man in the formal sense. I went to a vocational program straight out of high school. But I can read, and I can follow a thread. And what I found when I started pulling on the loose end of Callaway Holdings was interesting. There were 3 public filings over the past 14 months. Routine documents, the kind that get posted publicly and that nobody reads unless they're looking for something. 2 of them were standard. The third one had an inconsistency in the asset declarations that I didn't fully understand, but that felt wrong in the specific way that things feel wrong when numbers don't match the story being told around them. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't an accountant. I didn't know what I was looking at precisely. But I knew who might. I had a client, older guy, retired, brought me his Buick every spring for a full service, named Gerald Park. Spent 30 years as a forensic accountant before he retired. We'd talked a few times while I worked on his car, the way you do, and he'd mentioned his background once without making a big thing of it. I'd stored that the way I store useful things, quietly for later. I called Gerald that Friday morning at 8 o'clock. I apologized for the early hour. He said he was already on his second coffee, and what did I need? I described what I'd found in the filing. I didn't name names, just described the structure. The numbers, the inconsistency. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "Public records," I said. Another pause. "Daniel, what you're describing, if it is what it sounds like, that's not a bookkeeping error. That's the kind of thing that gets referred." "Referred where?" "Depending on the scale. State comptroller at minimum, potentially further." He paused once more. "Do you want me to look at it properly?" "Yeah," I said. "I do." We made a plan to meet that weekend. I hung up and sat with my coffee and thought about Trevor Callaway in his blazer with the collar up, looking around my shop like I was furniture he hadn't decided whether to move. I thought about the broken lock, the disconnected fuel line, the gray Honda across the street. I thought about what Sarah had said on the phone. "What do you need from me right now?" I thought about Lily asleep down the hall with her arm around Peanut, and I made a decision, not an angry one, a quiet, methodical one, the kind that doesn't make noise until it's already finished. Saturday morning I dropped Lily at Mrs. Patterson's and drove to Gerald's house. He lived in a neat colonial on the far side of town with a garden that his wife maintained with the precision of a military operation. He met me at the door in a cardigan and reading glasses and took me into his study, which smelled like old paper and coffee and reminded me of a library from a different era. I showed him the filings on my laptop. He read carefully, slowly, occasionally making small sounds that weren't words. After about 20 minutes, he sat back in his chair and looked at me over his glasses. "This is not subtle," he said. "What is it?" "Without the underlying records, I can't be certain. But the declared value of these assets doesn't align with the transfer activity in this period. Either someone made a significant clerical error 3 times in 14 months, which is possible but unlikely, Or someone has been moving money through this structure in a way that doesn't match what's being reported. He folded his hands. Do you know the principals involved? I know one of them, I said. He nodded slowly. Daniel, I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer me directly. Are you planning to use this to hurt someone or to protect yourself? I looked at him. I'm planning to protect what I care about, I said. And make sure someone doesn't get away with something. He considered that. Then he said, I'm going to write up what I see in these filings, as a formal memo. My name on it, my credentials. That carries more weight than a printout. He paused. Give me until Tuesday. I thanked him. He walked me to the door. And before I left, he said, You know, the Buick's making a noise I don't like. Comes and goes. Bring it in Wednesday, I said. I'll find it. He smiled. I know you will. Tuesday came. Gerald's memo arrived by email. 3 pages. Dense, clear, damning in the specific language of someone who had spent 30 years knowing exactly which words carried legal weight. I read it twice, then printed 2 copies and put them in a folder with Amber's written account and a still frame from Walt's video that clearly showed Craig's face and the camera. I sat at my kitchen table with that folder in front of me and I thought about timing, because timing is everything. I'd learned that in the shop. You can have every part, every tool, every skill, but if you try to start an engine before the timing is right, you get nothing. Or worse, you get damage. I needed to be sure before I moved. Not almost sure. Sure. That same Tuesday evening, Sarah called me. She'd been in the city for 2 days on a work matter and had just gotten back. She sounded tired but present. We talked for a while, normal things, easy things, and near the end she said, Can I come by the shop tomorrow? I feel like I haven't seen the car in almost a week. Yeah, I said. Come by in the afternoon. Is everything okay? She asked. She had a way of asking that question that wasn't really a question. It was a door she was holding open. Almost, I said. A brief pause. Okay, she said. And she left the door open, which is the kindest thing a person can do. Wednesday afternoon, she came by at 3. She looked the way she always looked at the end of a work trip, slightly unwound, her hair down instead of up, jacket over her arm instead of on. She walked in, and the first thing she saw was the Cadillac. I'd made progress that week. The engine was not only turning, it was starting. First attempt that morning, it had turned over and caught, running rough and uneven, but running, for the first time in 20 years. I'd recorded it on my phone because I didn't trust myself to believe it without documentation. She stood in front of the car and I said, Come here. I got in the driver's seat and she stood just outside the open door, and I turned the key, and that old Cadillac engine started. It was rough, it knocked a little, it needed more tuning, but it ran. That sound filled the shop, this low, alive, slightly unsteady rumble that had no business existing after 2 decades of silence. Sarah put both hands over her mouth. I watched her. I watched the way her shoulders came up and then fell slowly, the way her eyes went bright, the way she laughed once, just a quick exhale of disbelief, and then pressed her fingers harder against her lips like she was holding something in that was too big for the room. He'd have lost his mind, she said finally. Her voice was thick. He would have absolutely lost his mind. I turned the engine off. The shop went quiet again. I got out, and without either of us making a decision about it exactly, she stepped forward and put her arms around me, her face against my shoulder. And I put one hand on her back and held her there for a moment in that quiet garage that smelled like oil and old metal, and something I was starting to recognize as my own life changing. She pulled back after a moment, looked at me, and I knew it was time. There's something I need to show you, I said. And it's going to be hard to hear. She looked at me steadily. No panic, no flinch. Just that same quality she always had of being fully present for whatever was coming. Okay, she said. Show me. I went to the workbench and picked up the folder. I put the folder on the workbench between us and I didn't say anything for a moment. I just let it sit there. Sarah looked at it, then at me. She had that stillness she always carried. The kind that isn't emptiness, but the opposite of it. a fullness that doesn't need to move around to prove itself. She reached out and opened the folder. I watched her read. I'd organized it deliberately. Amber's written account first because that was the most personal, the most human entry point into what had happened. Then the still frame from Walt's video, Craig's face clear and unmistakable in the driver's seat of the gray Honda, the long lens visible through the windshield. Then Gerald's memo last, because that was the heaviest thing, and I wanted her to arrive at it already understanding the full shape of what her brother had done. She read slowly. She didn't rush through anything. The shop was quiet except for the ambient sounds of the building, the fluorescent light doing its occasional flicker, a car passing outside on the street. I stood a few feet away and watched her face and tried not to project onto it what I thought she should be feeling. When she finished Amber's account, she stopped and put her palm flat on the page. Just held it there for a second like she was checking whether it was real. Then she turned to the photo of Craig. She looked at it for a long time. Then Gerald's memo, which she read more slowly than the others, going back twice over the same section near the bottom. When she closed the folder, she didn't look at me right away. She looked at the Cadillac. About 30 seconds passed. "How long have you known?" she asked. Her voice was completely level. "The first call from Amber was just under 2 weeks ago," I said. "I didn't come to you immediately because I wanted to be sure. I didn't want to hand you something incomplete." She nodded slowly, still looking at the car. "The break-in?" "Yeah, that was him too. Almost certainly. I can't prove that part the same way, but the fuel line was tampered with deliberately and the timing lines up." She absorbed that. I could see her processing it in layers, each new implication settling before the next one arrived. She was doing the same thing I'd done on the night Amber first called, sitting in the half-dark of the shop and organizing the information into something she could stand inside of without collapsing. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were bright, but dry. Not the bright of tears held back. The bright of something that had ignited cleanly and was burning with direction. "He was going to show me fake photos," she said. Not a question, just saying it out loud to make it real. "Yes." "To make me walk away from you?" "Yes." She looked back down at the folder. "Because he thought I was embarrassing the family." She said those last 3 words with a flatness that carried more weight than anger would have. "That's what he said. That's what he said." She was quiet again. I let her be quiet. Outside, a truck went by and the light flickered, and somewhere down the street a dog barked twice and stopped. "Daniel." She said my name and waited until I looked at her. "I'm not going to apologize for him. I refuse to do that. That's not my debt to pay." She held my gaze. "But I need you to know that what he did, what he tried to do to you, to your reputation, to your shop, that is not something I'm going to let sit." "I know," I said. "Do you?" She tilted her head slightly. "Because I need you to understand that I'm not just angry as your whatever I am to you right now. I'm angry as someone who runs a company, who understands exactly what a tampered fuel system in a mechanic's shop means from a liability standpoint, who understands what Gerald's memo means from a legal standpoint." She tapped the folder. "Trevor didn't just try to hurt your feelings, he tried to destroy your livelihood. And apparently he's been doing something significantly worse to our family's company for over a year." I nodded. "I know. That's why I had Gerald look at it properly. I needed someone qualified to tell me what I was seeing." She looked at the memo again. "I have a lawyer, a good one. Not family. Mine personally. Someone Trevor has never met." She paused. "Can I take this?" "I made copies," I said. "That one's yours." She closed the folder and held it against her chest, the same way she'd held the manila envelope the very first day she'd walked into my shop. The symmetry of it hit me somewhere quiet. She left an hour later. Not in distress, went with purpose. There was a difference, and I could see it in the way she walked to her car, the folder under her arm, her shoulders back. She wasn't shattered. She was oriented, pointed at something. Before she got in, she turned and looked at me across the parking lot. "The car runs," she said. "Rough," I said. "Needs more tuning. Another week, maybe." She almost smiled. My dad waited 20 years. Another week is nothing. She held my gaze for a moment. Thank you for being careful, for not just reacting, for being smart about it. I didn't know what to say to that. I nodded. Go home to Lily, she said. And she got in her car and drove away. I want to tell you about the following week because it mattered even though nothing explosive happened in it. Sometimes the most important things happen quietly. I tuned the Cadillac. I worked on it every evening with the same patience I'd been giving it for 2 months. And it responded the way old things respond to real attention. Gradually, honestly, without drama. The engine smoothed out. The electrical held. I got the power windows working on the 3rd day, which felt disproportionately satisfying. And when I tested them, I ran them up and down about 4 more times than was strictly necessary just because I could. Lily came to the shop on Saturday and sat in the driver's seat. She gripped the steering wheel with both hands and made engine noises with her mouth. It's already making engine noises, I told her. Mine are better, she said. She wasn't wrong. Sarah and I talked every day that week, sometimes briefly, sometimes for an hour. She didn't give me detailed updates on what she was doing with the folder. I didn't ask, and she didn't offer, and I understood that she was moving carefully and that careful movement sometimes requires silence. But she called, and that was enough to tell me she was okay and that things were in motion. On Thursday evening, she said something that I've turned over in my mind many times since. We'd been talking about her father, about how he used to describe the Cadillac from memory, specific details, like the exact shade of the original interior and the particular sound the door made when it closed properly. A sound, he said, was like a bank vault. And she said, he would have liked you. Not because of the car. He wouldn't have cared about that part, honestly. He would have liked the way you're still here. Still here? I said, standing in the same place, doing the same thing after everything. She paused. There's a specific kind of man who stays, who doesn't run, doesn't perform, doesn't make a big show of himself. He just stays and works and takes care of what's his. Another pause. My dad was that man. I grew up thinking all men were, and then I learned they weren't, and I stopped looking. A beat of silence. And then I walked into your garage. I sat with that for a long moment. That might be the nicest thing anyone has said to me, I told her, which is either very sweet or should concern us both about my social life. She laughed. Actually laughed, surprised by it, and the sound of it in my ear in that quiet kitchen felt like the first warm day after a long winter, familiar and new at the same time. The Cadillac was ready on a Friday. Not approximately ready, not functionally ready. Ready. The way a thing is ready when the work is genuinely finished, and you know it, because nothing in you is still reaching for the next problem. I'd gone over every system twice. The engine ran clean and strong. The brakes were solid. The electrical was fully functional. Even the original radio, which by all rights should have been a lost cause, had been coaxed back to life with a combination of patience and a replacement capacitor that I'd tracked down from a parts supplier 3 states away who specialized in vintage American cars. I sat in the driver's seat alone for a few minutes before I called Sarah. I let the engine run and listened to it. I thought about the first day this car had come off the flatbed, smelling like stored time and lost years. I thought about Robert Calloway checking his gauges every single time, even going to Kroger. Like a pilot. I thought about what it meant to finish something someone else had started, and whether that was a kind of love or a kind of prayer or both. Then I picked up my phone. She answered on the first ring. It's done, I said. The silence on her end lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted. I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. She was there in 14. She pulled into the lot and got out of the car and just stood there looking at the Cadillac through the open garage door. I'd pulled it forward so it sat in the afternoon light, which was the kind of late Friday light that makes everything look like it belongs in a painting. Low and golden and a little heavy. The kind that doesn't last long but makes everything it touches look like it was worth the wait. The car looked like something that had come back from somewhere. Not new. It wasn't new. And it was never going to be new. And that wasn't the point. It looked like itself. like what it had always been under 20 years of silence and rust and forgetting. The chrome caught the light. The paint, original dark blue, which I'd cleaned and hand-polished over 3 evenings until the depth came back, had this particular quality that modern paint doesn't have, something that came from the era, from the way they mixed it then, a richness that you couldn't replicate and could only uncover. Sarah walked toward it slowly. She ran her hand along the front quarter panel the way you'd touch something you thought you'd never see again. She opened the driver's door. That sound, the specific solid close of an original Cadillac door seal, the one her father had described as a bank vault, filled the quiet lot cleanly. She stood there holding the door and didn't get in for a moment, just held it. Then she looked at me. "Get in," she said. Both of us. We got in. She in the driver's seat, me in the passenger seat, the way it should be. She put both hands on the wheel. The interior smelled like the leather conditioner I'd worked into the seats over 2 days. Not new leather, just old leather that had been cared for, which is a different smell entirely. Warmer, more specific. She turned the key. The engine started on the first try, clean and immediate. No hesitation. That sound filled the car, and I felt it in my chest, the same way I'd felt it the first morning it had started. Except now it was finished, and that made it different. Complete. The gauges swept to their positions the way her father had watched them sweep every single time, going nowhere special, and everywhere that mattered. Sarah put both hands back on the wheel and looked straight ahead through the windshield at nothing in particular, for about 30 seconds. Then she said very quietly, "Hi, Dad." I looked out my window and gave her that moment completely. We sat in the car for a long time. Eventually she told me what had been happening that week with her lawyer. She told it calmly, in order, the way she did everything. She'd presented Gerald's memo and the full contents of the folder on Monday morning. Her lawyer had spent 2 days reviewing the filings independently and had arrived at the same conclusions Gerald had, with additional observations that made the picture even less favorable for Trevor. By Wednesday, a formal complaint had been filed with the state comptroller's office. A separate letter had gone to the Callaway Holdings Board of Directors. There were 4 outside members, in addition to Trevor, notifying them of the findings and their fiduciary obligations. The board had called an emergency meeting for the following Tuesday. Trevor didn't know any of it yet. That was the part that required the most discipline, keeping it contained long enough to let the proper channels move before he had the chance to manage the narrative. Sarah's lawyer had been explicit about that. No confrontations, no warnings, no previews. Let the institutions do what institutions exist to do. "He's going to find out Tuesday morning," she said, "when the board meeting starts and he sees who's in the room." I thought about that image. Trevor Callaway walking into a conference room in his blazer and his expensive shoes, already composing his opening remarks, already certain of the room, and then seeing that the room had changed. "And Amber?" I asked. "My lawyer spoke to her yesterday. She's cooperating fully. She's protected. She hadn't actually done anything. She came forward voluntarily and her account is corroborated by Walt's footage." Sarah paused. "She asked about you, whether you were okay. What did you tell her?" "I told her you were better than okay." She looked at me sideways, something quiet in her expression. "I told her you finished the car." Tuesday arrived with the same indifferent normalcy that important days always seem to arrive with. I did an alignment job in the morning and changed the oil on a Jeep and ate lunch at my workbench listening to the radio. The country station was playing something I half recognized. Sarah texted me at 11:47. Just 3 words. "It's happening now." I put the phone in my pocket and kept working. She called at 1:15. I picked up and she didn't say hello. "He tried to deny it," she said, for about 10 minutes. Then the outside board member started going through Gerald's memo page by page and he stopped denying and started explaining. And the explanations made it worse. A pause. "He's been removed from his operational role pending the formal investigation. His company card is suspended. His access to the building is restricted to accompanied visits." Another pause. "He cried, Daniel, in the boardroom, in front of 4 people who've known him for years. I didn't say anything for a moment. He called me after. she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Not grief exactly, but the specific weight of something permanent. He said I betrayed the family. He said I chose a mechanic over my own blood. What did you say? I said Dad built this company from nothing with his hands, and that means something. And that if he'd understood what that meant, he'd have understood why I trusted you. She stopped. Then I hung up. The shop was very quiet. Outside, the afternoon was going about its business. Sarah, I said. I'm okay, she said. I want you to know that. I'm not calling because I need to be talked down from something. I'm calling because, she paused, because you're who I wanted to talk to. That's all. I leaned against the workbench. I'm glad you called, I said, and I meant it the same way she'd meant it. That first night, simple and direct and with nothing extra in it. 3 weeks later, the state investigation opened formally. Gerald was contacted as a supporting witness. The findings, when they became public through the required disclosures, were covered briefly in the local business section of the paper, the kind of short, factual article that doesn't editorialize but doesn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. Trevor's name was in the second paragraph. I read it once. At my kitchen table early morning before Lily woke up. Then I put the paper down and made breakfast. Lily came padding out in her socks at 7:15, peanut under her arm, hair going in 4 directions. She climbed into her chair and looked at the eggs I'd made and said, "Did you put the cheese in?" "I always put the cheese in. Last time you forgot." "I didn't forget last time. I ran out." "That's the same as forgetting." I put her plate in front of her. She inspected it with the seriousness of a restaurant critic, found it acceptable, and started eating. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window the way it does in late November, low and patient, touching everything gently. My phone lit up on the table. Sarah. A photo. No text. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. Then I did. She'd taken it from the driver's seat of the Cadillac. Through the windshield, just the road ahead, early morning light, the hood of that dark blue car filling the bottom of the frame. She was driving it. Just driving it. Nowhere specific, I think. Just going. I looked at that photo for a long moment. That car that had been parked for 20 years because nobody got around to finishing what they started. That car that had waited in the dark while time moved around it. Patient as something that knows its own worth. "Daddy, who's that?" Lily was looking at my phone with her fork halfway to her mouth. "A friend," I said. She considered this. "Is she the one with the green coat?" Kids notice everything. I don't know why that still surprises me. "Yeah," I said. "She is." Lily nodded with the gravity of someone making a decision. "She can come to dinner," she said, "but I'm picking what we eat." "That seems fair," I said. She went back to her eggs. I looked at the photo one more time, that road, that hood, that light, and I thought about what it means to fix something that everyone else has written off. Not just a car. A life. A season. A version of yourself you thought was too far gone. And how sometimes the thing that brings it back isn't one dramatic moment but just someone who shows up, pays attention, and refuses to quit. I put the phone in my pocket and finished my breakfast. Outside, somewhere across town, a '67 Cadillac DeVille was moving through the morning like it had somewhere to be. It did. We all did.